When you want different code to run, depending on whether a condition evaluates to true or false, you'd use an if statement. In contrast, switch is another way to provide different pathways through your code. It's an example of a selection programming construct. But instead of evaluating a condition like an if statement, switch is used to evaluate the contents of a single variable. Now, there are three key words that we would associate with switch in Java. They are case, break, and default. Now you can see here I've got a little program already written, and it uses switch. Now, in advance, I could use a series of if statements here, or an if-else, or even a more convoluted if-else-if, but there's a couple of reasons why I wouldn't do that. The first is I've got a situation where I've asked the user to put in their first name, type their first name, and we grab that and assign that to a variable called first name. But it's only one variable. I've got a situation where the point of my program is to output a slightly different message depending on the value of that name. So again, I'm only comparing I'm only evaluating the contents of one variable. So immediately switch springs to mind. The other reason why I'd use switch here instead of a series of if statements is that you can see it looks relatively neat and tidy here. If I did the same thing with if-else or if-else-if statements, I'm actually going to have to write a little bit more code. It's going to be a bit more verbose or wordy, and I want my code to remain neat and tidy as much as I can. So the way switch works is, first of all, we have the keyword switch followed by the name of the variable we want to look at, and that's in a set of parentheses. Now the whole switch statement is enclosed in these curly braces. If we have a look at the first section here, we have case Mickey. Well, case here is being used a bit like an alternative to an if statement. But case followed by, well, what value could first name contain, replaces an entire first line of an if statement and its conditions. So if in fact the first name variable contains the value Mickey, then we're going to display the word hi. Once we do that, there's not much point having a look at all the rest of these, so this is where break comes in. Break means get out of the switch structure. In other words, jump down to the closing curly brace of switch and go to here line 29. If there happened to be any code there, it would start running that code, and therefore skip lines 17 to 27 if in fact Mickey was the value stored in first name. But what if it wasn't? Well, if Mickey is not in first name, then these two lines of code here are ignored. They don't apply. So instead it switches to the next case. Well, if it doesn't contain Mickey, does it contain Minnie? No? Well, how about Donald? No? How about Daisy? And so on and so on. But what happens if the value of first name was something like Bob? I haven't catered for a Bob here. So this is where default comes in. Default is like the final else clause. If none of the previous names are stored in the variable first name, then mop up the loose ends with the code that comes after default. In this case, outputting, sorry, I don't know who you are. Now you'll notice here we don't have a break statement. That's because if I put a break statement here, it wouldn't actually break my code, excuse the pun, but it wouldn't be adding anything to my code either. Default is the last thing to happen in switch. So once this line of code here, sorry I don't know who you are, has run, well, we've already come to the end of switch, so we don't actually need to break out of it early anyway.